Ruth Ann Selby was 36 years old, a widow, and she had never once in her life owned a dress that somebody else picked out for her. Not one. When she was a girl, the flower brand stamped across the seat of her drawers would not boil out, no matter how hard her mother scrubbed. The children read it out loud in the schoolyard. "Chicken feed kid," they called her. She did not cry. She went home, and she taught her hands to match. Now let me tell you what happened on a Saturday feed platform in the fall of 1934. Verna Tibbs lifted the last 3 tea rose sacks off the truck before Ruth could get her hand up. And then she turned to the whole crowd, and she said it loud. Some folks sew their weddings out of chicken feed. And the whole Saturday platform laughed. But there was one man who came to that platform every single week. He bought by the pattern, not the price. He couldn't even pay his own feed bill, and still he bought. And he never once said why. In his corn crib, folded up in butcher paper, there were 12 sacks that matched. 12. I'll show you how they got there. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go on, do this one small thing for me. Subscribe and leave a comment telling me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Renwick Township sat in Tipton County, Indiana, and by the fall of 1934, it was on its 3rd year of drought. The corn came up short and pale. The wells ran low and mean. Folks counted their pennies twice before they spent one. Into that dry, careful county came Ruth Ann Selby, on foot, with a mended carpetbag and everything she owned inside it. She had been hired to cook. The Halloran family ran a threshing ring, and a threshing ring runs on food. A dozen hungry men, sometimes more, moving farm to farm as the grain came in. Somebody had to feed them. So, Mrs. Halloran took Ruth on to run the harvest kitchen. Good work, honest work. But there was a string tied to it, and Ruth knew that string from the first day. The job ended at first frost. When the last field was threshed and the cold came down, there would be nothing. No kitchen, no wage, no roof, just the road again, and the carpetbag. Ruth did not complain. She had learned a long time ago not to expect more than the season gave her. Here is the thing you have to understand about her. She owned nothing but a needle and an eye. But that eye was something rare. As a girl, wearing feed sacks she was ashamed of, she had made a small discovery that stayed with her the rest of her life. The cheapest cotton on the whole farm, the feed sack, the flour sack, the thing they hauled the mash home in, that was the one place beauty was still being printed. Little roses, tiny plaids, sprigs of blue. The mills knew the women would sew the sacks into dresses, so they made the prints pretty on purpose. Ruth saw that when she was 9. She never stopped seeing it. But nobody had ever chosen the pretty one for her. That was the wound under everything. She could match a print at 40 paces. She could make a flour sack look like it came from a store window. And no man, no mother, no friend had ever once looked at Ruth Ann Selby and picked the pretty one, on purpose, for her. So she was certain, bone certain, that she was the one nobody picks. Now let me take you to the feed platform, because you have to see how it worked. Saturday morning, the truck backed up to the loading boards, and the men unloaded the sacks. But they didn't just stack them any which way. They sorted them by print. Tea roses here, yellow florals there, the plaids in their own pile. Because every woman standing on those boards was counting. Counting the roses, counting the plaids, doing the quiet arithmetic in her head. How many of this one to make a dress? How many of that one for the baby? And then the trading would start. 3 yellow florals for 2 pink plaids. A swap here, a swap there. It was a market and a card game and a church social all at once, and it ran on cotton nobody was supposed to want. Verna Tibbs was the quickest hand on the platform. Always there first. Always got the best prints. Every single week, Verna beat Ruth to the good ones. And every week Ruth said nothing and took what was left. And on one of those Saturdays, a platform hand said something. He said it as a joke, the way men make jokes about a fool. He nodded over at a lean farmer, and he said, "That's Emmett Cade, buys the same tea rose pattern every trip, trades off everything else, and can't hardly pay his mash bill neither." He laughed when he said it. Ruth barely heard him. She was watching a plaid she couldn't afford. She filed it away as nothing. A fool who liked one flower. That was all. Remember that. It won't seem like anything now. Later it's going to be everything. The first proof came before dawn, and Ruth almost missed who did it. The kitchen pump handle at the Halloran place had been broken for a week. Loose, then cracked, then hanging by a thread. You cannot run a harvest kitchen without water. Ruth had been hauling it by bucket from the stock tank, and her back ached from it. And then one morning she came down to light the stove, and the pump handle was fixed. Tight, new pin driven in. Clean, nobody said a word. But she saw Emmett Cade's truck pulling out of the lane in the gray light, and she knew. He never mentioned it. Not that day, not ever. He just fixed the thing that was broken and left before she could thank him. Ruth stood there with her hand on the good handle and didn't quite know what to do with the feeling. Then came the church supper, and I have to tell you about that one, because that's where it got cruel in front of everybody. The Methodist Hall put on a supper, and in Renwick, a supper was more than food. It was the dress showing arena. Every woman in the county wore her best and walked the length of the tables, and everybody looked, and everybody judged. Ruth wore a skirt she had made from feed sacks and mended twice, and she had matched the print so careful you had to know cotton to know what it was. It was honestly the finest piece of work in the room. But nobody knew that, except Ruth. Verna knew what it was. Verna made sure everybody knew. She waited until Ruth was carrying the pie to the tables, both hands full, no way to answer, and she said it right out in front of the whole hall. Chicken feed dressed up for Sunday. The room went quiet the way a room does. Not silent, just that little drop, that little hush, where everybody's eyes go to one place and then go away fast. Embarrassed to be looking, Ruth felt all of it land on her at once. 36 years old and back in the schoolyard. Chicken feed kid. She did not answer. She set the pie down. She cut the first slice and passed it. Her hands did not shake, and I want you to notice that, because those hands were the only thing in her life that had never once let her down. And then something happened at the far end of the room. Emmett Cade, who had been sitting way down at the other end with the men, picked up his coffee cup, and he got up, and he walked the whole length of that hall, past all those eyes, and he set his cup down at Ruth's end of the table. And he sat. And he stayed. He didn't make a speech. He didn't glare at Verna. He just moved himself to her end of the room, in front of everybody, and drank his coffee like that was where he'd meant to sit all along. Ruth didn't understand it. She marked it down as pity. A kind man taking pity on the woman who got laughed at. Because that was the only shape kindness had ever come to her in. Pity. Or charity. She could not yet tell the difference between those and the thing he actually meant. Nobody had ever taught her the difference. How could she know? But the harvest kept them close. And the harvest is where they fell into each other without either one saying so. It was work that did it. It's always work that tells you the truth about a person. She noticed a thing about him. At the harvest table, when the threshing ring sat down to the big noon dinner she'd cooked, Emmett Cade never really ate. He'd take a little, bread maybe, some coffee. And then he'd say he'd had plenty, and get up. Every man there ate like a horse. Because that's threshing. Emmett didn't. And it took Ruth a while, but she figured it out. He wasn't full. He was saving it. Whatever was on that man's plate he was leaving for the next fellow. Because the next fellow was hungrier. And Emmett Cade was that kind of poor and that kind of proud all at once. And he noticed a thing about her. He learned, without ever asking, exactly how she took her coffee. Scalding hot, black, no sugar, not in a year like this one. And every morning at the threshing, without a word, there'd be a cup at her elbow, poured just right, hot enough to hurt. She never once had to ask. That's not romance the way the picture shows sell it. That's better. That's two people learning each other by hand, in the dark, before the light comes up. And then the word started to travel, the way hard word always travels fastest in a small county. Somebody had heard it at the bank. The Tipton County Farmers Trust held a note on Emmett Cade's 40 acres. $487. Due the first Monday of December, 1934. If he couldn't pay it, and everybody knew he couldn't, he'd lose the land. Ruth did the arithmetic, and it made her sick. His land would go the first Monday of December. Her job would end at first frost. The same few weeks were going to take everything from both of them. And that was when Clement Voss knocked on the Halloran door. Clement Voss was a widower with a dry roof and money in the trust, and he had come to make Ruth an offer. He said it plain, the way he'd buy a heifer. He had a house that needed running. She could run it. And to sweeten it, he'd bought her a dress. A real one, $1.98 from the Sears catalog, sized by guess, folded in tissue paper. He set it on the Halloran table like it settled the matter. Ruth looked at that dress a long time. It was a fine dress. That's the thing nobody tells you. It wasn't cruel of him. It was worse than cruel. It was a man handing a woman a life and never once looking at her face to see if it fit. They gave her her answer at the Grange Hall, Saturday, with half the township there to hear it. Voss stood up in front of everybody, sure of himself, and asked. And Ruth stood up too. She said no. She said it quiet, but the room went still enough to hear it. She said she'd rather sew her own than wear one picked to fit a household. She said a dress ought to be chosen for the woman, not for the kitchen she'd stand in. And she sat back down and picked up her coffee like her heart wasn't going 100 miles an hour. Voss folded the tissue paper back over the store dress. He didn't understand. You could see it on him. He'd offered her everything he had, and she'd turned it down for nothing. For a needle and a maybe. The next Saturday, at the feed platform, Ruth called Emmett Cade by his first name for the first time. Just, "Morning, Emmett," across the boards. That was all. But it was the first time, and he heard it, and something in his shoulders changed. Now here's where it gets to hurting. That winter Ruth started sewing a bodice. She didn't rightly know why. She'd been trading with Emmett all fall, the way everybody traded prints off the platform. And somehow her basket kept filling up with the one pattern. Tea rose. Little pink roses on cream. Every week another one came her way, and she never asked how, and she folded them and stacked them, and one day she had a stack tall enough to make something big out of. She started cutting a bodice. 3 prints short, but she started. She couldn't see it. That's the awful part. The whole county could see it by then, and Ruth Ann Selby could not. Because a woman who's been told her whole life that nobody picks the pretty one for her, she can't read a thing that's staring her in the face. She'd been the chicken feed kid. She knew what she was worth, and it wasn't roses. Verna Tibbs is the one who said it out loud. She meant it for a knife. Saturday platform, full crowd, and Verna throws it out like a joke everybody's in on. Did they know? Emmett Cade had a stack of feed sacks in his corn crib, folded in butcher paper. 14 months of them, all the same, all tea rose. A whole chicken feed wedding, Verna said, laughing, for the woman nobody picked. And the platform laughed with her. Ruth stood there in the cold with her face gone white. Then Emmett Cade set down what he was carrying, and he talked. Quiet, but the whole platform heard every word, because nobody was laughing anymore. 12 sacks, he said. 14 months. I only ever bought the one pattern. He wasn't looking at Verna. He was looking at Ruth. Because feed's the one thing on this earth I could hand you that costs nothing but which one I'd choose. And I chose the same one. Every week. Right here where the whole county could watch. hoping you'd be the one to cut it. You could have heard a pin drop on that platform. And Ruth didn't answer him. I want you to understand why. Because it's the saddest thing in this whole story. She heard him, but she read it wrong. She'd never once in 36 years been shown the difference between a gift and a pity. So she stood there and she thought, that's charity. That's a poor man being kind to a poor woman. And the bank was going to take his 40 acres in 3 days anyway. What did he have to give? What could she be to a man about to lose everything but one more mouth? She thought she was the burden, so she said nothing, and she turned and she went. The frost came early that year, came before anybody was ready. The Halloran harvest ended, the threshing ring broke up, and Ruth's job ended with it, just like they'd told her it would the day she came. She packed the mended carpetbag she'd carried into Renwick. Same bag. Nothing more in it than when she got there, except the tea rose bodice she couldn't finish, folded down at the bottom where she wouldn't have to look at it. And the first Monday of December, before light, she climbed up on the morning mail wagon and rode out of Renwick Township. Dignified, silent, sure, all the way down to her bones, that she'd never really been chosen at all. Now the same morning Ruth was riding out, something was happening at the courthouse. The note was due. $487, first Monday of December 1934, or the trust took the 40 acres at auction. And a man like Emmett Cade doesn't have $487 in a third drought year. Everybody knew it. But everybody had also been on that platform. The threshing ring came. The Grange came. Neighbors who didn't have 2 nickels to rub together came anyway, and they brought what they had. Emmett had sold his seed stock, the corn he was meant to plant in spring, sold to save the ground he'd planted in, and they laid it all down on the courthouse steps in front of the trust agent and the auctioneer, dollar by dollar, before the auction hour struck. $487. The agent counted it twice. Then he tipped his hat, and he put his gavel away, and he left. The 40 acres stayed Cade land. And then, on the same loading platform where the whole county had laughed, Emmett Cade knelt down in the cold and unfolded 12 tea rose feed sacks, laid them out in a row, in order. And he read them out loud, like a letter to every soul who'd ever laughed at Ruth Selby. He said, 1 sack makes a gown for a baby, 2 makes a shirt for a growing child, 3, 4, a day dress for a woman, and 12, with the fullness left in, 12 makes a wedding dress. Nobody laughed. Verna Tibbs stood at the edge of the truck with her hands empty. Verna, who was always there first, who always got the best prints off the boards before anybody. She watched the whole platform lean in to admire the very thing she'd called garbage. And for once in her cruel little life, she had nothing quick to say. Clement Voss was at the back with his hat on. He'd brought a $1.98 dress and a dry roof, and he'd thought that was how you won a woman. He watched a bankrupt farmer give her 12 feed sacks in a sentence, and he understood, too late, that he had never once looked at her. He folded his coat, and he went home. Mrs. Halloran had heard the whole thing, and Mrs. Halloran got in her buggy and drove that mail road hard, and she caught the wagon, and she fetched Ruth back to hear the last of what Emmett was reading off those sacks. Ruth came down off that wagon. She heard the end of it. 12 makes a wedding dress. At dusk he took her to the corn crib, opened the butcher paper, and there they were, matched exact. 14 months of choosing the same roses every single week where the whole county could watch. Ruth put her hands over her mouth. She couldn't speak. She'd been so sure. So sure nobody picks the chicken feed kid. Emmett said one word. He said, "Stay." She stayed. All that winter, Ruth Ann Selby cut and sewed those 12 sacks with her own 2 hands. Nobody chose it for her. Nobody sized it by guess out of a catalog. She made it herself, rose by rose, the thing she'd been told her whole life she wasn't worth. And come spring, she stood on the church steps in it. The whole county leaned in to see. Grandmothers counted the roses on the skirt. The chicken feed bride, they'd have called her once. Now it was the most admired dress in all of Tipton County, and every woman there wished her hands could match what Ruth's had done. Mrs. Halloran cried right into her apron. 6 months on, the 40 acres were green. First good rain in 3 years, and the corn came up on ground that was very nearly sold out from under them. The wedding dress lay folded in the cedar chest, and already Ruth had taken 1 square of that tea rose print and cut it down small, into a christening gown for a neighbor's new baby. Beauty handed down instead of worn out, the way the good things always go. And one Saturday at the platform, Verna Tibbs was there, first, as always. Ruth passed her by, and she stopped. And she said just one thing, dry as a bone. "You were always there first, Verna. You just never saw what was on the truck." That's the whole of it. The cheapest thing on the farm, the sacks the feed came in, was the one place beauty was still being made in a year that had taken everything else. And the man who noticed it spent nothing at all. He just chose the same roses every week, out where she could see, and hoped. Love built with 2 pairs of hands. It costs nothing but which one you'd choose, and everything to mean it. Comment the town you're watching from. I'd like to see how far this one travels. There is one thing the story does not say plainly, and it ought to. Ruth Ann Selby had sewn her whole life. She had sewn because she had to, because the cloth was free, because there was nothing else between her and the cold. She had never once sat down at a seam and thought, "This is mine. I made this because I wanted it." She had made things for necessity so long that she had stopped being able to tell the difference between necessity and herself. That winter, the first time she lifted the scissors over the tea rose print and cut, she stopped. She held still so long her breath fogged in the cold of the front room. Not because she was frightened of ruining it, because she understood right then that she was not making a dress out of need. She was making it because she wanted to be beautiful. She wanted to stand somewhere and have someone see her and know it was on purpose, that she had made herself that way, that she had chosen it. She had never let herself want that before. Not out loud, not where it counted. She cut the first piece. She sewed by lamplight most nights, and the roses ran themselves through her hands like water she was finally allowed to drink. She matched every seam by the print, not by the tape. She let the bodice out a 1/4 inch where the measuring tape said not to, because she knew her own body and where she needed room to breathe. That is the part nobody sees in the finished thing, a dress made by a woman who knows herself all the way down. It sits different. It moves different. You can see it in a room of 100 women if you know what you are looking for. Emmett came to the door in February with 2 cords of wood he said he owed her for the threshing kitchen, which he did not owe at all. He set the wood down without being asked where. He did not look at what she was sewing, which was how she knew he already knew, which was how she knew everything was going to be all right. Spring came the way springs come after long droughts, cautious, then all at once. The morning of the church steps, she put the dress on without a mirror. She did not need one. She knew what it was. She walked out into the April light and felt the cotton move against her knees. The roses turned outward where the whole county could see them, and not one single thread of it was anybody's charity. And not 1 yard of it had been chosen for her by a man with a catalog, and she had never in her life felt so perfectly, exactly herself. That is what 2 pairs of hands can build.